Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel, and we've promised this for a minute. We've finally delivered. We have done a mock draft on the Keeper platform to give you some insights into draft strategies, what happens when you do certain things, and maybe give you some insights also into how people are drafting and the impacts that that will bring into your team. Joining me on this podcast is fellow Coaches Panelist Minimug. Mate, nice to see you. Disappointing, I don't think you got Noddy in this draft. Yep, I'm running the joke as hard as I did Bruce a few years ago, mate. It is happening. Nice to see you. Pleasure to be part of the draft with you. And some interesting moves that unfolded on our draft.
Absolutely. I will preface this podcast. It is most definitely Nod season. I'm very sad that I didn't get him in this draft, but I will be looking for him in plenty of other drafts that I have coming up in the next few weeks.
Well, I dubbed my team Peatling season and did not get any piece of him whatsoever. So we'll see how we go. One of the other members as a part of this draft, you've seen him through the 50 most relevant. If you play AFLW Fantasy, then chances are you've seen and heard this man giving great advice throughout the fantasy footy season, both the men's and the women's competitions. From the Free Kick podcast, it's Liam. Hello, mate. Nice to have you part of the team on this. Your first pick didn't go to plan now that they're injured, but outside of that, pretty good draft from you, my friend.
Thank you, MJ. Yeah, Tom Green as my first pick. This was, a few days before we found out about the calf. Look, the draft isn't one in the first 4 weeks of the season, guys. It's all about that final run and, killing it on the waiver wire. So I'm pretty happy. And look, I've got a comfortable M1 later in the draft because I took Nod. And you say, you didn't get him this time. I took him with my third last pick. Like, let's it's not like you didn't have an option.
Yeah, that's true.
There, Monk. So, swings and roundabouts for you.
It's very, very true.
I'll take it. I take it. But it does sound like a little bit of cope when you say that it's not one in the first 4 weeks.
Yeah, I might need to remind myself of that too. So what we did on this mock draft is we set up an imitation of what it would look like for you if you were drafting on Shiva. So a 12-team league with the on-field rules of 5 defenders, 6 mids, 1 ruck, 5 forwards, and a utility position. It was made up, half of the participants are part of our Patreon if you want to become a part of that. All the details in the description of this episode. Then some Coaches Panel members, so Kane, Mini Monk, myself, Jordox. We got the man from Keeper himself, the Grand Commissioner, Ryan. I may have handed him first round pick at number 1 just to keep the great man on happiness. And then, of course, Liam was a part of it and Bales of the Fantasy Fanatics. So that is who was there. We'll work you through every single round. Well, the first 10 anyway. That's where the interesting stuff really sits there. And this is how the first round went down. Ryan went Cherry at 1. Kane goes Marshall at 2. Floss, who's one of our Patreons, Sheasel at 3. Mini Monk gets the first midfielder off the board with Dacos. Jordox goes Dawson. Corey goes Goulden. And then for the back half of the first round, Ash jumps in. The ruck run keeps going with Gorn at 7. Liam, as we've already alluded to, unfortunate now with the injury news, but made a lot of sense at the time. Green at 8. Gunners, another Patreon, with Brayshaw at 9. Bales chimes in with some Bontempelli at 10. Merritt at 11. For Matthew, and then me wrapping up the first round on the tail. Bailey Smith, the first forward off the board at pick 12. Minnie, any shocks, any surprises as you were going through that first round that you're thinking, oh, yep, this is exactly how I see this going, or a little bit different?
Probably close enough to what we would expect from a first round. I think it's worth noting that because it's the +1 utility, it does tend to push the rucks just a little bit higher up the board because you can back up a ruck with another ruckman. And that might be a little bit of a spoiler for later on. But seeing Gorn go at pick 7 as well as Cherry and Marshall in the first 2 picks is a little bit probably of a stretch for me. But aside from that, it's looking pretty reasonable for this sort of a draft.
All right, we then head into the second round. Liam, we'll get your take on this second round. On the turn, given we did a snake draft, wasn't happy with 1 forward, so I went a second with Jason Horne-Francis, first pick of the second round. Do we need to stop there? We'll get to the other stuff. Oh, I loved having fun on this draft. Whitfield was the second pick in the second round over to Matthew. Bales follows through with the third forward off the board. He gets McRae. Flanders goes to Gunners at the fourth pick of the second round. Liam doubles up with a second mid with Caleb Sarong, a nice pick there. Ash lands Butters with the sixth pick in the second round. Corey gets Noah Anderson. Jordox also does a double mid selection. Goes Jack Steele. I know a few people might be surprised to think that's where he is, considering some names on the board. We'll hear more about that philosophy in a minute. Minimonk also does a double mid selection with Connor Rosie at the ninth pick in the second round. And then to bring it home in the final three, Floss goes Young as their first mid. Hayne jumps into a forward. So that's now 4 forwards off the ball, 3 in the second round, 4 basically in that entirety. And then Nick Martin, the keeper commish himself, also jumps on a defender sitting through there. So Cherry and Martin for him. Any standouts, shocks, surprises, or about right calls for you there, Liam?
I think you caused a bit of a shock wave going the double forwards. I think 4 forwards in the first 2 rounds is probably one too many for me to be comfortable. And look, I wasn't complaining sitting there at pick 7 in the first round to then only see 3 more mids go before it loops back around to me. I think at the stage where I'm drafting, where you're drafting where those kind of top 3 highest averaging rucks have gone, when you do have a utility, to get the chance to go 2 uber premium mids and stack. And funnily enough, myself, Monk and George have all done that. So Dacos, Rosie, Dawson, Steele, Green, Sarong. I think that's comfortably your next best strategy because as we'll kind of find it in this draft, particularly as well if those forwards have started to drop away, I think you're really going to drop away on that midfield depth and you're going to start finding like, oh, damn, like I'm going to have to take like a Brisbane Berry and be comfortable running that at my M5. So I felt pretty good drafting where I did. And there weren't too many surprises outside of maybe more. If going ruck into forward, given we know that there are depth issues in the midfield, or at least we're not comfortable knowing where those 100-plus scorers are going to come from, I was a little bit surprised, even though I do like Moore's ability to be a 90 this year.
I think what's really important to say, obviously having some deliberate fun with going the double forward, but can I encourage you for a number of reasons, when you go 2 forwards like that, and I know some coaches might be tempted because they hear the positional scarcity of tier 1 forwards, so the theory is, geez, in the third round, I might be able to jag a good top line mid my way or a top line defender my way. All well and good, but if the variables of luck don't land your way, you're going to be really thin through the midfield. And as Liam's talked about, those top end mids are just as vital as that top end forward. And a double top end forward, can I tell you, if you're going to do it from someone that's endured a draft where now you're looking at a midfield that, yeah, forward line looks fine, but the midfield, you're feeling a little thin at the top end. Early days is not pretty. Let's jump into the third round. Back on the snake, the keeper commish Ryan leads us off. We go Dunkley, Kane goes English. So his first 3 picks, Marshall, Moore, English. So clearly getting rid of another of the top end rucks and with the utility position, still trying to maximise some on-field scoring. Floss goes Holmes. Mini Monk continues the forward trend there, gets Caleb Daniel. Jordox goes 3 mids, one of 2 coaches to do mid. He goes Walsh, so he's now got Dawson, Steele, Walsh. I'd love one of those just quietly. Corey jumps into Isaac Heaney. Ash picks up Luke Ryan. Liam decides to move out of the mids for a moment with some Nazaya Wanganeen Millera. Rankin goes to Gunners. Bales gets Taranto, who I would have liked at my next pick, and it might not have looked as bad if you had landed Taranto there. Matthew gets Zorko, and then maybe a little surprising, certainly to me, Sinclair sits there at the back of the third round. I decide to grab him at that spot. What are the standouts and the reflections for you, Mini Monk?
I think it's pretty clear at this point. There's no top tier forwards and defenders left on the board. I think Sinclair probably rounds out that tier to me. You could argue that Mills belongs in that tier, but it's a bit of a close line. And I'd say that forward line tier ends with Rankin. I think, once you've gone past Smith, Horne-Francis, McRae, Moore, Daniel, Rankin, you're starting to get to a bit more of the speculative picks. So it's interesting to see that if you're wanting one of those types of players, that probably has to be in the first 3 rounds. And you could argue that English is probably the last of the big 4 ruckmen as well to go. So it's interesting to see how the draft plays out for the ruckman after this point. I did allude to it early with the rucks going early in that first round. There is a bit of an interesting thing that happens a bit later in the draft as a result of this. So we'll get to that in a sec. But it's also interesting how few midfielders went in this round as well. There was just the 4 that went off the board: Dunkley, Walsh, Heaney, and Taranto. I feel that that's a little bit indicative of coaches wanting to say, I want to fill out a different line. I've got 2 mids already, or I've got a mid and I've got a top tier another line. I want to go to a different line to have a look at it. And I'm looking at a lot of the teams towards the end of the draft now, once we had the full results, and seeing a lot of the teams that went 2 midfielders in those first 3 rounds came out looking pretty nice. And a lot of the teams that went the 1 come out looking a lot poorer. So we'll have to see how that plays out for the rest of the draft in terms of how it affects the coaches' strategies.
Yeah, certainly do. It would come back the other way with me with the first pick in the 4th round. I finally go outside of the forward and defensive line. Clayton Oliver at M1, repping 2022 strong, ladies and gentlemen. Lockie Neal goes to Matthew with the 2nd pick. Callum Mills is that last kind of top line or tier-breaking defender that you've alluded to there. He heads off to Bales, who has got now 2 mids, a forward and a defender, so looks pretty balanced on paper. Gunners gets Cripps. Liam jumps on probably the next best ruck in TDK. Ash picks on Laird as their 2nd mid. McKirch is an interesting pick here, and I'll get Liam your take on this round in a moment, given the names we see still to come. Jordox also jumping away from the midfield for the first time, getting mid-forward Baker, who again could be a defender, become a triple position player and become very, very important and versatile with that role in keeper. Houston goes to Minimunk, also locking away some positional need in the defensive line. Floss gets LDU. Kane gets his first mid-2 in the draft, as will Ashcroft, and the commissioner, Ryan, from keeper, gets track. Any thoughts or reflections on that round of the draft for us?
I think that that round very much shows that, at least personally, I think Taranto's the last player that you could be comfortable with as your M1, to be perfectly honest.
Yep.
I don't know if I love Clary or Ashcroft as your kind of M1. I do just think you're really having to take a chance and a bet there that I just don't feel comfortable with. I think McKirch is fascinating. I think it's a pick that you might make if you think he's going to get forward stats. I think that's where maybe his value might come from. And this kind of is something that for keeper, you've obviously got the triple position possibility. So his mid-forward time may actually contribute to him actually getting it. But ultimately, I think if you're thinking on a wider platform basis, I think McKircher has the possibility of maybe 50% forward time, or at least lining up, starting on half forward, and therefore may gain that forward eligibility and become a really valuable player. But it's not a guarantee at the moment, and I don't think that Alistair Clarkson knows. So it's a hair early for me, and if I was looking for someone who I could dependably sit at my D1, probably would have gone Houston, to be perfectly honest. I don't think you could make a case for Stewart or Clark. McKirch is just a really dangerous option.
Yeah, you've still got likes of Bailey Dale still, but we'll go in the next few rounds. Liam Duggan, Houston, who Minimunk gets a few picks later. Stewart goes in the next round. Gosh, even a Short and a Clark and Sicily, should he maintain. There's a bit more risk element potentially associated with that. It's probably the first time I thought Correa was like, oh, that was the most interesting and brave call of the draft, but I appreciate what he did there. Let's go to the next round, because this is what Minnie alluded to. We start to see coaches realise it just takes one to take a ruck, and everybody else that goes, geez, I want one that's half decent, starts to act fairly quickly, and part of it's because some of the moves others make. So the commissioner gets, I think it's about the 8th forward off the ball in Daniels from the Giants. That probably feels about right for where he goes. That's F1 for him. Kane does what you'll see me do a little bit later, which is, probably need another mid. He gets Matt Rowell. Floss gets Jackson as a ruck forward, so you could argue that's their ruck. You'll see exactly what Floss does a little bit later that really kind of connects that in nicely. Minimunk gets Nankervis. Jordox goes and gets Tom Stewart. Corey, our Patreon, Jordan, Clark, Ash. Interesting here, gets a second ruck in Brodie Grundy in the 5th. Liam jumps on Caldwell. Short is the next and second defender off the board for Gunners. Cameron from the Magpies is Bale's ruck. Matthew jumps into Kieran Briggs. And then I decide it's probably best to stay in the midfield and get the suitcase himself, Hugh McCluggage. Thoughts there, Mini Monk? Reflections? This is where the rucks really started to fly off the board.
Yeah, it's another round where there's a majority non-midfielders taken. Only the three mids go in that round, which is Rao, Caldwell, and McCluggage. And two of the three coaches that take a mid in that round had started the draft with three non-midfielders. And I think that's really interesting to see that they have to back it up with those midfielders and can't potentially take advantage of some of those defenders, forwards, and rucks that might have slipped down into a later round that they might have wanted to get into. So it's starting to see how, I guess, your early draft decisions really do affect you later on. I kind of, at the time of when this draft was happening, I saw Jackson go and I thought, I think there's a potential to start a ruck run here by taking Nankervis. And it is interesting to see that of the four rucks that go that round, one of them is a double up on a ruckman, and then the next two go quite late in the round. I don't really want to spoil too much of what's to come, but next round sees a few more rucks go, and then we get into a bit of a dry run after that, which is quite the fascinating part. I also do think that Jackson in the fifth round, it does feel a little bit early to my liking. Maybe if this was a Supercoach draft, I probably would have considered him a bit earlier. But in AFL fantasy, I think that floor is quite scary when we have a lot of other quite reliable, probably 80s type forwards on the board still.
Yeah, well, McDonald's still there. Sanders is still there. Mason Wood is still there. Bolton, Cameron, Simpkin are all still sitting in this spot. You've got Warner, you've got Treloar, you've got Richards, you've got Josh Kelly. Yes, we get to get him in a podcast and with justified cause, ladies and gentlemen. Even a Matt Crouch. Like, these are all guys that are sitting in the next couple of rounds that all kind of go through there. The next round, I join the ruck panic and get Riley O'Brien to kick off the sixth round. Matthew gets Warner. Bales goes around for a second ruck. I'm going to get your thoughts on that, Liam, in a moment. He gets Meek. And then this is where the positional lack of mids continues on. Gunners gets Bolton. Liam jumps as Brian Myers as his first forward. Jeremy Cameron goes to Ash Witts for Corey. Sweet Jordox probably wraps up that ruck run. And then Mini Monk steers us into the forwards with Simpkin. That's his second forward, but in that sixth round. Crouch goes to Floss. I think Kane gets one of the best value buys of the draft. To get Dale where he did as his D1 is a great get. And then the commish Ryan follows it up with Duggan as his second defender off the board to wrap up the sixth round. I know you've got some thoughts on this, Liam, but Minnie's alluded to it. The double ruck early because of utility, it is a play, but it's a different style of play to, say, Kane, who's gone two top-line options with Marshall and English. Bales has gone Cameron and Meek, albeit at different value spots. Is that what's the right question? Maybe is that the right approach when you should be taking these final tier, quote unquote, of rucks on field? Or would you much rather pair it with a better on-field option? What's your take on kind of wrapping up that last option to get a decent second ruck?
So I think at the point you're taking a second ruck, you're actually just ranking them between the mids and the rucks for scoring, because that's ultimately what you're trying to do. You go, well, if you're a full-time inside midfielder, you probably you want to score above 80, 85. You're a full-time ruck, you want to score over 80, 85. And so when Lloyd Meek gets taken, the mid that's just gone is Chad Warner, who's in low 90s, and then we actually have very few mids go. So the next ones are Crouch, Dacos, Kelly, Richards, without wanting to spoil too much. I think that Lloyd Meek, I don't know if he's someone who's going above 90, but I do think Josh Dacos playing off halfback, Josh Kelly playing is another 90 plus, as is Ed Richards. I wonder if it's the best value option when there's a massive run on forwards before the next pick happens. I think, yes, whilst it feels great to go, yep, another ruck, that's a really consistent score. matching that up against the other mids you might pick in that spot, or thinking about it as, well, what are my forwards looking like? I think, particularly given that you're doing it as the second pick just before it's going to be a big gap before you go again, and this is a stage of the draft, I think, where forwards are going to get really, really thick and fast. I probably wouldn't have done it specifically then, but I think it was a good way to show like how it is that can match up. And obviously I can't predict the future. Lloyd Meek could be a 95, 96 player, and it could ultimately be a great selection, but it's a really interesting time to do it, and it might not be one that I've done, and it kind of shows the potential pitfalls.
Yeah, it does. Then we head into the next round. 5 forwards go off the board in the 6th round, and then if you didn't have one yet, they evaporated in this next round. Ryan gets Kennedy, Kane goes Sanders, Floss goes Parker, Mini Monk goes McDonald from Hawthorn, Jordox gets Graham. So most people now have 2 forwards across all of those 5 teams, with the exception, I think they've all got 2 forwards by this point in time. Then Corey brings us back to our first mid. I think it is Hewitt goes to Ash, Rivers to Liam. So the first defender in almost 10 picks at that point in time. Gunners is an absolute punk and gets Josh Kelly a few picks before I would have liked him. So Gunners is now officially uninvited from any other mock that we could participate in. Bales gets a forward. That's 4 picks in a row where he doesn't pick a mid, which is pretty common. Mini ends up doing 5 non-mids in a row at this point in time after going mid early. Matthew gets his hands on Ed Richards. And then I thought I got a little potential value right at the end of the 7th round, and probably needed after having no decent mids to that point, with Adam Treloar. Mini, you set that forward run on fire with the Simpkin pick, and then my oh my, did it just continue for us?
Yeah, it really did. You could argue that it started a little bit earlier with Bolton and Myers and Cameron all in a row. But then I think that might have been a bit of the culmination of the ruck run as well, with Sweet and then Simpkin going. But, since from that Simpkin pick, it's Simpkin, Kennedy, Sanders, Parker, McDonald, Graham, Hewitt, and Wood. That's 8 forwards off the board in the space of a round and a half. Yeah. If you are on the turn and you didn't have a forward at that point, or towards the turn like Matthew, who's gone 3 mids, 2 defenders, and a ruck at that point, you're probably looking at your forwards and going, it's pretty dire at that point. And I think it's really interesting that you picked up on, myself, Liam, as being coaches that have gone mid to start off with, and then are just able to pick up players at whatever tier you want to at that point. I think that it opens up the ability to say, I really like this forward. He's still in the top tier for me. He's still in the second tier for me. I'm just going to grab him and hope that one of my next tier guys gets back to me on the way back, rather than being locked into, if you've gone like you did with the forward, I have to take a midfielder on the way back here. And I think if you're towards the ends of a draft, like say you're in a 12-team league, being 3, maybe 4 away from the turn, say that's pick 8, pick 4 or pick 8-ish, or pick 3 and pick 9-ish, that allows you to have a bit of a control over when these runs start to happen. Because if you can back up, forward into forward or defender into defender, it can really start to set off a panic. We did see that earlier in the draft with Matthew going Whitfield into Zorko. Sorry, that's not right. Sorry, never mind. But we do see that happen a few times in the draft with people going double positions and really forcing the runs to happen. And that's a really strong thing to be able to do in drafts, because it puts people into a panic state, and that allows you to be able to pick up value later down the line.
You talk about value down the line. I'm curious on your take, and it's not just because I picked him, I promise. Like, an Adam Treloar's the number 1 mid based on average at a 110. At the end of the 7th round is definitely not a space that, outside of the hamstring injury, people would think is going there. With a player that's a clear top liner or top 2, how do we balance this out on draft day, this value that a guy could give us, but knowing that you're almost inheriting a potential slow start as a result? And that's the time of year you don't want to carry too many injury impacted guys, because that's where the waiver wire and the player pool's at its best. So how do you balance that potential value of a guy like, just using Treloar as a namesake, which is a clear top 2 tier guy, versus inheriting a slow start? How do you make that balance on the fly?
It's really tricky. I think it actually might have hampered a lot of your draft from that point onwards, because if you're going to be running a guy like Trelaw on your bench, you're going to have to go one deeper in your mids anyways. And because you'd already locked yourself into 3 non-mids in your first 3 picks, it kind of locks you into having to go a lot of mids deeper from here. I think it's definitely a value pick, but it's a very risky strategy in that. I think if you look to have depth in a particular line and you see a guy who's injured and presents value because of where they are, that's when I'm more likely to take them on. Like if someone's gone quite a strong ruck early and say a Sean Darcy's quite late in the draft, like in the 10th, 11th, 12th round, you can go, yeah, I might take that on because I can cover that ruck line. And then when he comes back, he can slot into my utility. I get one of those M7 types off of my midfield, and I'm in a much stronger position because of that. Or if you're in the defensive line and you have concerns associated with Sinclair, you back it up with an extra defender earlier on in the draft because it pushes that worst defender off later on, but you still are feeling strong throughout the rest of the draft. That's how you kind of have to consider when you're looking at these players that do have injuries, but also do present value.
Yeah.
Can I just add,
please?
just to add my 2 cents? If I was in your position, I would actually be thinking that a player who goes just a little bit after, in Adam Chera, a Will Day, and a Sam Doherty are probably where I would have gone instead, because they are high upside and will play straight away. You're obviously coming from a disadvantaged position because you've locked away those 2 forwards, but then you've had 22 picks go before your next pick. Try and take a swing on someone who has a high upside and high skill and has a bit of pedigree, versus, kind of signing yourself up for an indiscriminate amount of time with a bloke sitting on your bench whose only value is looping.
Yeah, it's a really good shout. We kick off the next round, the 8th round. We're only going to highlight the first 10 and then kind of pick some of the eyes out of the final a little bit. Tuke Miller rolls through for me there. Matthew gets his first forward in the 8th round with Jesse Hogan. So that's where we start to see, and he's not the only person that gets his first forward in this round. Bales gets his hands on James Sicily. Gunners, I think, gets some pretty decent value with Matt Roberts with the 4th pick. That is his 3rd defender off the board, ahead of people. I think some only have 1 or 2 at this point in time. Liam gets Cherry, talks about that upside that's available and absolutely nails it. Ash gets their hands on Doherty. Corey, F1 is Darcy from the Bulldogs. So much like Matthew, locked in some really strong other elements, but then going and getting their hands on Darcy. Jordox moves us back to the defensive line to Perryman. And then really 7 of the next 8 picks are mids, but to end the round, Minimug gets Day. Floss gets their hands on Newcomb. Callahan goes, and then Akers. We've really seen rucks, and we won't see them again for a while here, Liam. But again, those that realise there's their last options in their tiers are gone. And then there's, of the mids, people are probably, with the exception of Akers and probably Miller, getting guys they think have upside to push right near that sort of 95 sort of territory.
I still think, I think Took is another, like I didn't mention that before because I didn't want to take away from actually giving you some props on this little bit. I actually think that's another good pick, and that's in part because Flanders seems like he'll miss a little bit at the beginning of the year. And I think we know that when he can play as both that kind of dual inside-outside mid, he does have a really high ceiling. And the kind of pick you need to make there. I think this was a good round for midfielders. I think also Jordox got a nice pick in Perryman for his D2. You're talking about runs earlier. He's gone 6 non-mids in a row, but that's by virtue of having gone 3 mids off the bat. So you do get to see that same thing, Monk, you were talking about earlier, where if you go 2 mids early and then you're just able to like snipe off the top of your lines ever since then, I think that Jordox has followed a similar strategy, and I think it's played out well for him. He's now got kind of Baker and Graham F1, F2, Stewart and Perryman D1, D2, and then Sweet in the ruck is kind of the last of that tier that everyone likes. It's the last ruck we have for, so many picks, so many rounds.
It's true. Then we head back to our final 2 rounds, and then I'm going to get you boys to pick some eyes out of this. Again, we're running through more to give you a sense of what's happening and to pick on a couple of things, because again, everybody had a different set of strategies going in, and it's a mock. So some are doing it, picking guys they would never normally pick there, but they want to see what it looks like. So everybody's trialing a bunch of different things here. So our commissioner goes and gets his third defender, Ryan. He gets Mason Redmond, quite like that. Ollie Hollins goes here, which for some might be a little bit too high, but for others is about right, to Kane. Pete Ling goes to Floss. You have also been uninvited from every future activation after naming my team after him. Come on, Floss. How could you not help me? Rowbottom lands to Mini Monk. So again, we talk about these stretches of things. He's now, and you'll see even furthermore, deep into hitting that midfielders after he locks away those top liners of mids, hits that forward line heavy. And then he comes in through there with Rowbottom. 3 defenders fly off the board to Jordox, to Corey and Ash with Rioli, Amon and Blakey. Liam heads back to the well for his second forward with Harry Mackay. Gunners gets his hands on Ridley. Bales decided it's Bombers season and gets Darcy Parish, who at this point of the draft is either going to be a great pick or just a giant pain in the butt, depending on how his health goes in 2025. Kerno lands to Matthew, and then I wrap up the ninth round with clearly just going, well, if I'm going to be starting the year slow with an injured Treloar, let's double down on it and get our hands on Mateus Philippou as well. Minnie, what's some of your thoughts and reflections on the picks in that round?
You start to see a lot of coaches backing up their picks by their strategy. You know, you're seeing the coaches that have gone shallower on the mids, probably through the first 7 rounds, start to bring a mid in. Coaches that are a bit shallower on the defenders or forwards start to bring those in. Again, another round where a ruck doesn't go. It's quite crazy at this point how it's been now, 1, 2, 3 full rounds without a ruckman going since Jordan Sweet went off in the middle of the 6th round. I won't be surprised if we see these sorts of things in a lot of your actual drafts as well. But we do start to get to some of the more speculative type breakout, I guess, defenders. I think Rioli and Blakey are probably relatively known quantities that could present a lot of value. I've been personally digging for Amon in a lot of especially keeper redrafts as someone who I think is quite undervalued, but he went at somewhere where I would consider him pretty good value in this draft. Even someone like Ridley, who people have undervalued because of his injury history, I think he still has the potential to be at least a tier 3, if not a tier 2 defender. But it is interesting with your strategy to back up an injured Adam Treloar with a Mateus Philippou. You talked about the waiver wire being thin later on the season and being at its most active early on in the season when you can get those potential value picks. By holding 2 really strong players when they're back fit that you would never want to put onto the waiver wire, it really hampers your bench ability and the depth of your squad as well. Obviously, it's a bit of a content draft. We're trying to see how things go with it, but it's definitely not a strategy that I'd advise. Like, if you're taking on one of these types of guys, you have to probably wait until a lot later before you're getting another injury type. And it's probably someone that isn't going to be the potential tier 1 or probably even a tier 2 in their line. You're probably looking at guys that could maybe reach the tier 3, tier 4 levels. And you're probably getting them when you're selecting, your last 2 or 3 that might be on your field, not when you've still got another 10 players that are going to be on your field at this point.
Yeah, 100%. Talk us through that a little bit, because there is that moment on a draft day where you go, oh, this person's undeniable, quote unquote, value based on perception and projections, but rightfully so. And again, very well picked. It's purely to create a conversation. You look at a Treloar, you look at a Philippou, and look later on the draft, I've really doubled down to prove the theory. I picked a Wardlaw. I picked a Yo. I've picked all these guys, even a DeGoey sitting in there. It's like, you're just getting guys that, yeah, sure, probably perceived to be value where you get them, but you are just stuck. Now, you are committed to a slow start to the year and missing who's decent on the waiver wire. So you miss the pops of the community series. You miss the pops that are going to fly in rounds 1 and 2. And so from someone that's deliberately led into the strategy, yeah, you want value from where it is, but you are now, if you were to actually carry through my team for the year, 1, I'm coming last, but 2, you just can't move. You're absolutely stuck, aren't you, on draft day by going double forwards early? You're just stuck with what you can do. You can't get the right value. And then by going Philippou, Wardlaw, DeGoey, Yo, all these guys, you are now unable to activate the waiver wire. So you just can't afford Mini Monk to go too hard, too deep, despite the value you think is there off these injured or slow starting season guys.
You're hamstrung, pun intended. Like, you just have nowhere else to move. And I think that that's the biggest thing that you need to look to in your drafting strategy, is to always put yourself in a position where you can be flexible with your next pick. Because if you are in the middle of a draft, or even if you're at the ends of a draft, yes, you get 2 picks back to back, but it might be 22 picks until the next one gets to you. You don't know whether you're going to be able to pick up a forward, a mid, or a defender, or a ruckman. So you got to be able to put yourself in a position where when the value gets to you, you can take whatever it is. Because if you've already got 2 ruckmen and all of a sudden Brody Grundy's there at pick 70, you're going, I want to grab that, but I can't at this point, because then I'm just hurting myself for the rest of the draft. And similarly here, you're saying, I've gone 8 picks deep, I've gotten some good mids, but I've already gotten one who's injured. I can't now take someone like a Matthias Philippou at this point, because it's now you're just putting yourself in a position where your first 10 weeks of the season are going to be really hard. And if you win 2 or 3 out of those 10, you'll be very lucky.
Yeah, if you're in a position, maybe like Jordox, for example, or even, looking at Floss's team or Matthew's team, it's like, well, you've got top liners where you've got fitness, you've got health, you're totally okay. You can afford that stash at that point, but certainly not on a team that's been curated and built the way mine has. Then the last round that we'll talk through on this episode, McGrath goes, Neil Bullen goes for Matthew, Bales gets his hands on Toby Green, Gunners gets a potentially interesting value pick. Some are really bullish on a Stephen Cornelio this year. Others really aren't too sure. Liam gets his hands on Kane Farrell, so that's his 3rd defender off the board. Ash jumps into Liberatore. Corey gets his 2nd forward in Ollie Dempsey on the keeper platform. He has forward status allocated. Jordox gets a guy that could either become his M4 or his D4 in Dylan Shield. Ollie Wines goes to Mini Monk. Hopper to Floss. Durham to the Salmon Boys of Kane. And then our commissioner, Viney, goes to Ryan. Liam, some thoughts and reflections on that round of the draft?
It's the old band mids draft round, because we've had Cornelio, Libba, Shield, Wines, and Viney.
Pick your poison, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it really is. So I think that, kind of going off the bat, I think McGrath going where he did, I think he's probably slipped a little bit. I still think it's a super solid pickup. I think at D2, D3, he's going to be really good. I think that what we're really seeing as well is that Corey not managing to nab one of the kind of Toby Green, Neil Bullen, Curnow, Philippou level forwards means that Ollie Dempsey, I'm worried about as your F2, and that's just kind of the way that it goes when you really are. Again, he got stuck at the end of another ruck run, and sometimes that's the disadvantage of being
in the middle,
being stuck in the middle of the draft, is you can just have runs go either side of you, and you just feel like you're playing ping pong the whole time. I think the one pick I want to talk about the most though is Dylan Shield. Just a player I'm happy to let other people draft. I don't think he's going, and I said this when I did my 50 most relevant, I said he'd be playing halfback for the VFL team, and lo and behold, he's looking like he's going to play halfback for the ones. I just don't think that he's going to last, because he has defensive deficiencies and his kicking is terrible. And yes, he will probably score well when he plays. I have very real concerns that he will actually be able to stay in the side. And I think that was the first mid that Jordox had actually been able to take since Walsh. I did like going 3 mids early and getting some value in Sam Walsh. I just don't know if I want that Dylan Shield as my M4, particularly when you've got a pick 6, and he's probably going to be a better value prop only as a defender, because if he's not playing as a defender, I don't think he's scoring. So that's one where I am a little bit concerned. I probably would have preferred a Viney or a Durham, because I think they're going to play every week in my mind. Hopper and Wines, I don't know. I personally, I think Viney and Durham was where I was looking at this point in the draft. And it really does come down to that M4 probably in below or M5 and M6, you're looking for that, let's just get an 83, 84, 85, and they play every week, and I'm not having to worry about the waiver wire trying to find someone that's just invariably not there.
Yeah, well, you talk about people's M4s. Like I'm rolling Miller, Matthews rolling Richards, Parrish for Bales, Gunners has got Cornelio, Chera, Doherty, Day. Like these are people's sort of M4 sort of names. And then for sake of reference, the next mid Jordox gets to isn't till round 14. So where he addresses M5, which is a Bailey Scott. So clearly wants to lock away that on-field forwards before he sits there anywhere else, minimum.
Yeah, I mean, I had a bit of a look at the top 10, well, the first 10 rounds and looked at how many mids people were taking off the board across the teams. And it averages out to be about 4 mids for most teams across those first 10 rounds. And this is where I'm talking about with that flexibility is if you're taking 3 midfielders off the bat, we've seen that there were 2 teams that did that in Jordox and Corey. Jordox gets his 4th mid in the 10th round, and Corey actually goes a lot longer before he even goes for his 4th mid as well. Whereas the teams that have gone 1 or just the 2 mids in those first couple of rounds, in the first 3 rounds, have actually ended up with a lot more rounded of a midfield. You know, you look at the keeper commissioner himself. Yes, he's gone Cherry and Martin, but then he's gone Dunkley, Petrarca, Akers, Viney as his midfield. Or someone like Bales, who's gone Bontempelli, Taranto, Parrish. He doesn't go for his 4th mid, but it's until the next round. But it's a Tim Kelly, who I'd be very comfortable with as an M4 personally.
Or Liam's got Cherry,
Liam, who's gone
Sarong, Green, yeah.
Exactly. And those are the sorts of ability to be able to say, if you take 3 mids, you kind of go, right, I've got a good core locked away. I want to start to fill in those other lines, because looking at a very empty defensive or forward line gets quite scary when you're getting towards those 8th and 9th rounds, when you're starting to see the likes of, as you were talking about, Ollie Dempsey's, Harry Mackay's, Andy McGrath's, Tom Green's going off the boards as your first forward or defender. That gets very daunting. And I think going those 3 mids early kind of pushes you down towards those sorts of lines.
Yeah. Liam?
I would also say that if I was going to go that 3 mid early, I'd probably be consigning myself to punting rucks. Like big Oscar McInerney is probably where I'd be looking. Given that at this point you'd be doing a draft and you know that he played in the match sim, that man is a walk-up 82 every year. Just that's what I'd be thinking. I'd be going, all right, well, I've locked in 3 superstars at the top of my lines. I've now got to be sniping everything I can forward and defense. Bang, 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 every time, and still trying to get an M4 that I like. And then just going, yeah, I'm absolutely pushing it out. At that point, like, you know, we've still got a Darcy sitting there, a McInerney, and then you're looking at probably another strategy is trying to handcuff Essendon rucks or Eagles rucks. That's the strategy I'd be going for, because I think it's that, I need to get in on the ruck run, and it turns out to be the end of it anyway, and you've still not managed to get an M4 that you like. I think that's where the potential pitfalls lie, or at least that's how I would do it. Kind of in draft, I'd go, all right, I'm consigning myself to this strategy. I've got to see it through to the end. Yeah,
I'm boxed in, so I'm going to commit and make it work. So that's the first 10 rounds of it. A couple of interesting thoughts, and I'm keen to get you guys there. Gunners really went the punt rucks. Probably went a little too late on the punt rucks. I'm talking 18th round, gets Bailey Williams, and then didn't do the handcuff that you alluded to, getting a Reece Stanley as their second last, while a potential playing ruck. That really would have protected that pick with, man, I'm just going to get this guy here. Nobody else is going to touch him. I'll do it later. I do this with O'Reilly O'Brien. I pick him midway through the ruck run in the 6th, and I'm like, well, no one else is touching Kieran Strawn. He was the last pick in the entire draft. And then some other rucks, like Ash goes heavy on rucks early. 2 rucks in their first 5 selections in Grundy and Gawn. Then get Blixarves in the 18th round. That's probably more depth than anything else. And then Reedy. So really making it hard for those that want any piece of rucks. Some very interesting moves through there. What were some of the standouts, the sliders and shocks for you there, Mini Monk, kind of from round 11 onwards?
Oh, I mean, you go down the list, you look at someone like a Tom Powell, who's being talked up as getting quite a fair chunk of midfield time currently with Wardlaw missing, and I think he's a really crafty pickup probably in the 11th round. someone like Jack Silvani, who's there's talk of moving into a defensive role, becoming a bit more of an interceptor and distributor for Carlton, looks someone who's amazing value, especially as a deep forward in the 14th round. I think that there's a lot of undervaluing of some of the really... Yeah, Garcia in the 12th. I think there's a lot of undervaluing of some of the midfielders. It's very easy to just find a few 80, 85 midfielders to plonk into your field late. But if you start to go towards players that are a bit more inconsistent about how many games they're going to get, like the likes of Dangerfield or Ross or, some of the rookies that even went, like Finn O'Sullivan, Layla, Draper, probably all went way earlier than I would think. That I'd have them more as bench punts rather than having them on field. But, I can't help but get it. But like someone like Nathan O'Driscoll or Matt Johnson at Freo will probably walk up 80s most weeks, 75s, 80s. They can have a punt, you can play matchups. Players like Massimo D'Ambrosio, Bailey Scott, Matt Gurney, while they play a lot of an outside role, all three of them know how to find the pill and can be pretty safe 80 picks that I'd be looking to try and nab up late. And some of the smarter coaches along the lines have really probably got a couple of rounds worth of value out of players like that.
Yeah, it's good. What about for you, Liam, to bring us home? What were some standouts, some shocks, some sliders? What's some things that really stood out to you in these final 15 rounds or so?
Yeah, I think the one for me was the fact that I'd gone to Conning, and I'm surprised I got away with punting Mark Pitnet until the second last round of the draft. Given that, and this is something that Stevie Fizz has talked about, it's usually better to pinch other people's handcuffs because they can become value very quickly, or they can be someone that they immediately become just like, I don't care about it anymore. Someone's better on the waiver wire. Off you go. I'll go and pick up my new F3, for example. Yeah. So I'm surprised he lasted as long as he did. I did like the value monk of picking up Lockie Schultz in the third last round of the draft. Feel like we've seen him be that 75 averaging forward before. I definitely think there's some potential there. I would have definitely taken him before any of the rookies, for example. Another pick that I think is great value is Elijah Sardis. Bales gets him in the fourth last round of the draft. I think that's a great punt for your bench midfielder. I was looking at it, could not bring myself to do it because I hate watching him kick the ball more than Dylan Shield. I would like it, but I think that's some really great value. But obviously the pick at this point was taking Nathan O'Driscoll as my bench mid. I think he's someone that can fit into that high 70s, low 80s range this year. Yeah. Jeremy Sharp is someone that I think you could conceivably ask to do 75 again this year. If you just remove that, whatever it was, thou shall not be named score against the Western Bulldogs in the middle of last year. I do think I fully agree that there are definitely some undervalued players. Just don't get sucked into some of the classic and the super coach hype of some of the rookies. I say that having drafted Harvey Langford with my final pick in the draft, but at that point it's just a throw at the stumps. And to be honest, I think I only take him because I think he's going to get forward status. And at that point, maybe he's a 70, maybe just I'm chancing my arms, but don't do most rookies aren't Sheasel and most rookies aren't Dacos.
Yeah.
And we probably know a lot more about what they're going to do earlier.
Yeah. And you want to look for players that are walk up best 22 or close enough to it every week. And there's a lot of players that were still on the board towards the end of the draft. I mean, you look at the likes of someone like Tom Sparrow going in the last round. Ned Reeves went in the last round. I know that he's probably a bit of a handcuff to someone like a Lloyd Meek, but even players like, Travis Boak, Hunter Clark, Jake Bowie, Bailey Williams, Ben Hobbs, or probably not Ben Hobbs, but Schultz, as you mentioned for myself, and even someone like James Harms, who these are all players that if they're fit, they're probably playing for their teams. You don't want to have half a dozen of these speculative ticks because if 4 of them are dropped on a particular week, you're suddenly left scrambling the waiver wire for picking up a 50 or a 60 of whoever you can get and potentially dropping a player that you might not want to have dropped to the waiver wire because they do have the potential to go 80, 85 when they are in the team. I think that's where you've got to kind of balance that risk towards into the draft. It's worthwhile taking punts every now and then, but you don't want to punt too many and too many players that don't have good job security.
Yeah, it's some really good advice from both of you as you're either heading into doing your Shiva draft in a few weekends' time or your single season approach league. You boys have given us some great insights through what people were doing, the strategies they were trying to unpack, and then just some little pitfalls that we can find our ways through on the draft day. And let's be honest, even the most experienced of draft coach can see a run and panic and rush, and others can make, good decisions and bad decisions on draft day. So while it's a mock, it's not going to be something we rush through. And there are picks that all of both you boys and others made deliberately to try to get some reactions from the group or whatever. I certainly appreciate you giving us your advice throughout this mock draft and this recap of it. So thank you, mate. As always, Liam, an absolute pleasure. Where can we get in touch with you across social media, mate? I'm sure this won't be the last time we speak to you this pre-season, let alone season proper.
You can find me on Twitter at LiamAFLW Fantasy, and obviously you can find a Free Kick doing all of the official AFLW Fantasy content on Twitter, and Blue Sky at Free Kick W Pod.
There you go. I'm sure we will hear from Liam plenty more times during this season proper. Minnie, as always, a pleasure, mate. I think it's been about a week without speaking to you, which at this time of the year is weird for both of us. We'll fix that up over the next couple of days, mate, as we get close to round one. As always, mate, an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, a week without physically speaking, but a bit less than that between the DMs every now and then. We've always got those lively chats going at this time of year when things happen in practice matches or injuries unfortunately strike. But it'll be good to be able to schedule in our regular weekly roundtables to chat about the season as we get into it. We're only a couple of weeks away now.
Real close to it now. Every single Tuesday night, very, very late, probably more likely to be Wednesday morning, you get them. Our weekly strategy podcasts do commence. You can get them like you're getting this episode, either as a video episode or the audio podcast. They will be there for the rest of the few weeks of the preseason and the season proper. And here on the channel, new content dropping every single day. There's still some draft episodes, some rankings, some reflections, some strategy stuff to go. And of course, if you're more focused on the salary cap side, we've got you covered. The match reviews of the community series are there. It is a non-stop shop here at the Coaches Panel. If you've been enjoying the preseason with us so far and you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you do so. If you haven't become a part of our Patreon yet, you can get our draft tiers, which, by the way, do not advocate for going Horn Francis and Bailey Smith in your first two picks. Just to be very clear, I'm not leading you astray on that one. Those can be found for our breakout and our premium tier supporters. You can get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch and a ton more stuff. Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you're looking at this on YouTube, who would you have picked if you had the number one pick? I want to know. And then who would you have picked if you had the number 27 pick? Yeah, random. I know. Go back through, listen who had gone. We'll see who you would do in those two spots. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back with you again tomorrow with another episode here from the Coaches Panel.